Hi everyone, I'm Dan Anderson at PagerDuty. I lead our analyst relations program, and today I'm joined by Tim Chinchen as well as Charlie Betz, our guest speaker from Forrester. We're excited to talk to you today about building resilient operations. It's certainly been top of mind for everyone as software is complex and imperfect, and IT outages are not a question of if but when. So I thought we'd have a discussion today about the topic, and let me hand things over to you, Tim, if you'd like to do an intro, and then over to Charlie.
Great stuff. Thank you very much for the intro, Dan. And as you said, I run the global solution consulting team here at PagerDuty. So we're going to have a morning or an afternoon, depending upon your time, of going through and reviewing some of the things that we've seen happen across the IT industry in the last year or so. And there's a couple of incidents that might still be top of mind for many people out there. So I'd love to hand over to Charlie. So let's frame the conversation. And what are we here to talk about?
Well, and great to be here, Dan and Tim. Thanks so much for having us here from Forrester. Obviously, critical topic, top of mind for many folks. And the fundamental point I want to start with is that digital systems have become they just continue to become increasingly life critical, socially critical, economically critical, safety critical. And this wasn't always the case. I mean, a major outage 30 years ago might have meant missing payroll, which was not a good thing. But nowadays, I mean, there are actually, cases where it's pretty clear that somebody died, because of a ransomware attack on a medical system. And, the list goes on. So I will think that this is something we all have to keep in mind every day. We work with these increasingly encompassing systems that just permeate and provide the social fabric in so many cases for us. And I think there is a real responsibility that has to be taken quite seriously in when you find yourself operating and tending to these systems.
It's unbelievable, isn't it? I think when we first met, Charlie, I mentioned a story that I shared with my team, which was close at the start of my career. I made a small bug, a little oversight. It was the Visual Basic 6 integer. I didn't know certain things about that, and it runs out just after about 32,000. It runs out. So I effectively took out the flaw of a whole insurance company, just one flaw. I think if you read the post-mortem or the retrospective or the opportunity to learn, as we refer to it, for the July 19th outage, you'll see it wasn't far off. I think it was the number 20. What was it? Parameters expected was 20. We fed it 21. So fascinating. And the global repercussions of that was unbelievable, which we'll talk about shortly as well.
Absolutely.
I want to share just quickly as well, and I want to go through some of this and actually hear back the learnings that you've had, Charlie, with all the clients and individuals you've spoken to. But I just want to talk very quickly about that July 19th, that 5 a.m. experience, and then get your views on it as well. This is a genuine graph from PagerDuty, and this was what woke me up at 5 a.m. before it was splashed over the BBC News and all the other news outlets around the world. I got a PagerDuty incident. Came on through, looked down at it, and actually, as you'll see down the bottom, our software said, this is a little bit of an anomaly. This doesn't happen often. Lots of alerts from various observability and monitoring and lenses that we've got on our systems here over at PagerDuty to tell me that something wasn't quite right. I was obviously in bed at the time, but I wasn't going to put a photograph of me being in bed, so I thought I'd go for the guitars instead. Charlie, you and I have that love for guitars, but this is what actually came through. This got me out of bed. And it's fascinating, as a vendor whose life revolves around real-time, critical incidents, to actually see this unfold. And this was for us, it was game time. This was the time where actually we held back from phoning up all our customers because they were busy. Most of us in PagerDuty, we dropped a nice polite email or a WhatsApp to all of those friends that we've got out there in those companies, just saying, thinking of you today, hope you're not being too affected by what's going on. And just give you a little bit of an overview out there. This was what we ended up seeing on July 19th. Nearly a 200% increase in incidents, nearly a 300% increase in notifications, and an insane increase in workflows being executed on our platform. So this is effectively sending out updates to stakeholders, mobilizing all those Windows experts or all those people on the ground that were going to be responsible for doing reboots at a very, very simple booting into safe mode and deleting files. And last but not least, we'll talk about some of this, and I really want some of your feedback on the maturity that you're seeing out there when it comes to resiliency. We saw a lot of our customers, in fact, the ones that performed best were those that were running with AI ops in our incident management. They performed 65% faster. So reducing through a lot of the grouping, the correlation, all the sort of good stuff that's now available through. I've got this far without saying the word AI, but through machine learning and Gen AI and all that sort of good stuff, and managed to drive a much faster resolution time than some of those kind of less, let's say less mature, less advanced when it comes to resiliency. And what I'd love to do, Charlie, is hear about your approaches. What do you see in terms of people maturing in this day and age? So I'll zip out of ours, and there we go.
Yeah, it's there's some builds on here too, so let's move
there we
through
go.
those. Yeah, and this is it is there's just no shortage, and the future itself, I think, holds some interesting potentials, and interesting in the sense of that ancient curse, may you live in interesting times. Because I think there's going to be no shortage of opportunities for people to kind of refresh their understanding of exactly how do you approach and think about this problem of critical systems that are no longer behaving as you expect them to behave, which is some very nice neutral clinical language for some situations that actually become fairly fraught. Next slide.
Yeah, I recall I did an interview straight after the outage as well, and someone asked me, what do you think the next one was? And I was going to launch straight into, I think it's going to be, and I had to hold myself back to say, do you know what? I think we're going to have to wait and see. Who knows what it's going to be? We haven't got this crystal ball in front of us.
Yeah, well, I can say that there are, as we speak, there are extremely large, significant incident workflows and mobilizations happening in the state of Florida.
Absolutely.
And it is one of the most interesting aspects, which we'll reflect on a little bit towards the end of the presentation, has been the influence of real world, not that computers aren't the real world, but we can also think of them as cyberspace, but real world incident management and the influence of the Department of Homeland Security incident management protocols. And PagerDuty was a leader in this back, a few years ago now, when folks began to realize that the traditional IT incident management protocols, which were fit for purpose at the time, protocols like IT service management, ITIL, let's put the incident in a ticket and kind of rally around the ticket. And I think it was Jesse Robbins, the master of disaster at Amazon, who began to realize that AWS was becoming something that needed something much more fundamental. And then he reached out to the fire services and started learning what the folks on the ground in the National Forest Service in the U.S. had been learning over the years when you're dealing, with deploying crews to fight fires in the wildlands of the United States. And really, some of the fundamentals, complex systems generate incidents. They are, that is one of the fundamental truths. We will never arrive at some nirvana where we are no longer surprised. We continue to create complexity. We continue to layer complexity on top of complexity. When complexity is working and we're
Yeah.
enjoying it, do we kick back and sit in the shade, enjoy a pina colada? No. We take the system that now seems to be working at the baseline and we put the pedal to the metal. We see
Yeah.
how fast we can make it go. And then eventually it breaks and people say, oh, what a surprise, right?
It always used to be, old school, always used to be the network, because it was this strange thing that nobody really understood, and you had to get an SME because everything else always seemed to be absolutely fine. And thanks to the call out as well, response.pagerduty.com, and really adopting that kind of incident commander and all that sort of framework as well works beautifully.
Yep. So, visibility, we still find incidents reported by the customers, not detected by the ops team. This is seen as a failure.
Yeah.
And I do think it is important to have the kind of sensors available that can identify things that are showing up more on the customer side. Your empathy in understanding that there was something untoward happening on July 19th, exactly what I mean by empathy here, right? Because the
Yeah.
PagerDuty platform was working fine.
Oh, it was wonderful.
And yet there was something going on the customer side that you then detected because you had the right analytics. So kudos there.
We've always talked about maybe we should be, but again, it's sensitive to customer data, obviously. So I'll put that out there as someone who sits in Europe, but we really can be that early warning system. And
Mm-hmm.
the fact it was across multiple customers was the biggest surprise that we actually had with that
Yes.
incident creation.
Yep.
And also another very interesting fact, it was the most amount of out of hours notifications that we've actually sent out in our 15-year history as well. So
Wow.
yeah,
And
a lot of stats were
that's saying
broken
quite a
that day.
bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then finally, context. Those who know me in the industry know that I've always been harping on context. Most organizations, I would say, as an industry, the $1 trillion IT industry is still in its infancy with understanding what it's even doing. And part of this is just the nature of the beast. We're layering complexity on complexity every week, every month, every quarter, every year. And we don't yet have the tools and the introspection into what is happening, who's in charge, what the dependencies are, what the assets, the resources are. People talk of CMDBs, people poo-poo CMDBs. I am past that conversation. We have a data management and an insights and a context problem. I don't care what label you put on it. And that problem
Yeah.
continues to accelerate. So, next slide.
Or
So, go ahead.
noise, beautiful conversation.
Yeah. And this we've heard this over and over again. I mean, you can look in the causal analyses of the 12-year-old incident, target.com, major breach. A lot of us still remember it. They, it was there in the monitoring that they had at the time. They just
Yeah.
had too much other noise surrounding it. They knew something was going on, but they couldn't isolate. You're looking for needles in increasingly larger and larger haystacks, a planet-sized haystack full of needles, I think is another,
Definitely. I
yeah,
have a background in observability, and yeah, I was at definitely for at least 5 years in my career the king of I told you so. If you'd looked here, and then I go click, 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 click,
right,
click, click. There it is. There's your multiple JDBC calls or your connection timeout, to which there'd be all these people go, so there it is. But how on earth did he get there? So
right. And then, in retrospect is, not easy, but it's easier than aware in the moment awareness. And just to kind of level set with our audience, again, kind of what we're doing here, I think the broader frame that maybe I neglected to say earlier, it's moments like July 19th that, well, I forget who said it, never let a good crisis go to waste.
mhm.
Many organizations are reevaluating exactly these protocols. and
Yeah.
looking at, well, how did it work? How do we do these things? And for those of you who are maybe scaling up, you're a bit newer to these things, maybe you've been focused on ticketing. Ultimately, when you're in a highly urgent situation, you find that the ticket is a highly ineffective means of collaboration. You find that your chat rooms have little to no audit trail. Oh my gosh, the chat room automatically purged all that conversation that could have given us
Yeah.
insight into what happened. And so we need to move, even though the any given incident is an emergent and surprising phenomenon by definition, you still need standard operating procedure. And certainly, your local, just talk to your local fire captain, about that. They have, even though they don't know when the next fire is, you better believe they have process.
Yeah.
And people's lives depend on that process. And then you have to do follow up. And I'm just going to say this is where a lot of organizations have the best of intentions. And we all know the road to, we'll call it perdition, is paved with those good intentions. On to the next crisis. And yeah, we should do these after action items. And okay, we'll get to them. But then the business wants the new shiny object, and the agreed upon action items kind of get neglected. They're not even handled in the same queue, the same work queue. And this is, I think, if I would shine one light on a bullet point here, it would be that last bullet point. Does your operating model recognize incident-driven demand as a co-equal funded resourced priority in your value stream
Wow.
investments?
So alongside all those new features, or as you say, I'm sure some individuals, the Brent Geller scenario back at the Phoenix project of just being the superhero, lurching from one to the
Yep,
next.
exactly.
Fascinating observation. And the other one, in my 7 years, it's happening. Fortunately, it's happening less. But when I first joined PagerDuty, I was shocked at how many people, you mentioned chat rooms here, how many people were running incidents on WhatsApp, for example. Great
Absolutely.
platform for communicating with my family, not the best for corporate comms when it comes to dealing with a major incident. But less and less, but every now and again, one sneaks on in, and you'd be surprised at the companies that I could tell you about that. But yeah, not for a webinar.
Right, of course. So, we're an analyst
Are
firm.
we
We
in?
create frameworks. Here's a framework. I like this framework though because it's not some, mythical kind of standard incident life cycle where you identify the incident and then you figure out what to do and then you analyze. This is not. I think, I mean, those kinds of life cycles. Yeah, sure, they're important, but this is a much higher level, I think, set of distinctions that helps us understand that your day-to-day operational work, is still a thing. Ticketed incidents might still be a thing. Certainly if somebody's an end user has an annoying thing happening on
Yeah.
one node, I don't have any fundamental issues with tickets there. I think that you do have queues you have to manage and prioritize, and I think that structured large scale work tracking is still important. I know some of my colleagues, I get into this with, I won't name names, but you can probably guess, think that
Yeah.
ticketing is the root of all evil. And I'm just not going to go there. I'm sorry. It's huge amounts on the far left here. And then you get into this interesting middle zone where stuff gets more complex. You're trying to be more proactive. You've got to actually have more people at the table. You need, if you've got an IT ops organization, you still have a NOC, you still have a help desk. And I tell you, we don't see those going away, even with Agile and project to product and all of that.
Yeah.
They actually become products. But when we get into the middle zone, it gets much more interesting, and you need more collaborative forms of work. You need to make sure you've got the right people engaged at the right timing. And then, of course, you get into the full-blown crisis. And at that point, yeah, you need war. We don't call it war rooms anymore. That's a little bit of a
Yeah.
dated term. Or maybe, I don't know, do people still call them war rooms?
I think they do, but again, it's not the most sensitive of terms, is it?
No,
Sometimes so I
no,
think
it
we're
isn't.
moving away from those sorts of things as well. But you're
Yeah.
right, and it's always fascinating. I was working with a gentleman in London who their business is about practicing IT incident response. One of the things he fed back to me, emergency service are practicing all the time. IT professionals just seem to like practicing it live, just once a week. Let's have a let's have a
Right.
crisis, self-induced. So, and again, PagerDuty has always been, and along with a number of other companies, we've always been at the forefront of running our failure Fridays, which we don't
Yes.
always now run on a Friday. We run them throughout the month, and the day may
Yeah.
not be a Friday, but we've kept that traditional name in place.
Yeah, and I think in one other version of this, I think I had chaos engineering under proactive
Oh,
remediation. So that's it would in general it would fit there under continuous improvement. But there's real work there that's got to be done, and it's not necessarily going to take place in the context of a ticket. It's funny what you say about they always like to do it live. It's like, is the IT industry, is it a bunch of frustrated improv comedians? You know,
I
they don't
think
want to
so.
rehearse the act. They just want to,
Just jump
be whose
straight
line
on
is it?
it. Absolutely.
Yeah, and the trouble is no, you're not all Ryan Stiles, if anybody knows that name, but
Oh, well
yeah,
aware of Ryan. Yeah.
yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
Um, Okay, so yeah, let's move on to the next slide. And I, these next few slides get a little bit deeper. This is in some ways a restatement of the
Yeah.
previous slide with a bit more a bit more detail. We do see the chatbots, interactive self-service. Above the line is more human-centric. Below the line is more purely machine to machine, roughly speaking. It's automated throughout, but then the component of the human to human becomes more and more important. Uh, Top left, service desk, chatbots, not even the service desk. You just, get the bot to help you now. And then you still have time box conversational. I don't see that going away, even with chatbots, and then you've got the real-time collaboration along the bottom. You've got, your standard, pre-incident alerting, event management, alerting, auto remediation run books, and then human initiated run books. Then you finally have the ticket, which is simply saying this is a big enough deal that we are going to actually formalize and record it, as
Yeah.
a named type of exception. That's what an incident is, and I think that conceptually we will always need that concept, regardless of how we manage it. And then you've got the chaos engineering, drills, and we see analogs in the security incident and event management. And then finally, at the right, you have the full-blown crisis declaration, marshaling and dispatch, and the declaration of a major incident, which also should be a formalized thing. I mean, it's not just something that somebody says, "Oh, I think this major." No, I mean this actually sets things in motion in your
Yeah.
operating model. And those of you, especially if you're scaling up, you may not quite yet be aware of that. But in the largest enterprises, you declare these things, you declare disasters, you declare major incidents. And if you're regulated, then the regulators really pay attention to what you do before, during, and after those major incidents or disasters. Now, let's just go to the next slide because
Yes.
it's a build.
It is.
Um,
Yeah. There's definitely still humans in the loop for that declaration.
Absolutely. The
Crisis
quest, no,
management.
back up, please.
Oh, yeah. There we go.
Just a real short point. Um, I'm a fan of a guy named Don Reinertsen. He is, one of the thought leaders in in product management generally, but a lot of his insights have been adapted and eagerly adapted by the Agile community. He is a strong advocate of understanding the queuing problem. Now, the interesting thing is that when you're in a crisis, you typically don't have queuing issues because the incident gets a front of the line pass. It gets a hot lot, what was in a job shop called a hot lot ticket. And so everybody focuses and swarms around it. But in order to not have so many of those, it is important to understand where you do run into the queuing issues. and to manage those aggressively. And this is one of the forms of coaching that at Forrester I'm always giving IT operational professionals, because we're still a little bit too negligent in our understanding of queued up work. And the bottom line is that we always will need queues. The point is not to eliminate them. The point is to mitigate them, try to automate where you can, get the human out of the loop where you can. But the human's going to remain in the loop. I'm a little bit of an Gen AI skeptic on some of the more enthusiastic statements we hear about that question. Next slide.
Is that
And the next, go ahead, Sean.
augmented, or we talk about the augmented engineer rather than
Yes.
replaced, or the enhanced engineer? And I think it'll probably create some new roles as well. It's something that we can be excited about.
Yep, very, very likely. I think, not to go back to the last slide, but that one spot on the last slide where we talked about real-time forensics under stress. People who know how to get answers out of Gen AI are going to be able to deal with those real-time forensics under stress more easily. But those people themselves will need to be trained, because now you're dealing with all the cortisol and adrenaline cycling through your system. I mean, this is what militaries do. This is why militaries drill, so that it just becomes automatic kind of muscle memory. And then we reach the retrospective. We've survived the incident, and now it's time for retrospective. And I think one of the points that I actually liked, I created this slide, but some of my slides I'm kind of mad about. I like this slide a lot because I think it shows the full scope of what the after action items can be.
Yeah.
They cover the gamut. You need to update your major incident protocols. You may have had a major learning on your actual disaster recovery protocols. You need to update those. You need to update your knowledge bases. You need to update your run books. You need to update, the incident handling any of these are up for enhancement. But the
100%.
big one is to actually get the product updated so this doesn't happen anymore. But this happens slowly, iteratively, gradually over time, Tim. I mean, the retrospective team might have said, okay, one of the causes, I'm not going to say root cause, but a major cause was memory leak. We didn't stupid simple example. We didn't reboot the server, right? And we knew there was a memory leak, but we forgot to reboot the server, and we were doing it manually. Okay, so now we're gonna bring in Rundeck, and we're gonna reboot the server automatically every 72 hours, right?
100%. A nice sticky
we've all been
blast,
down this road. Really solving this means get the product team to write some better code, right? But in the meantime, we are going to update the runbook and we're going to update the knowledge base so that when and if this happens again, we catch it more quickly and it doesn't become a major incident. A very, very simple, plain vanilla kind of a case, but it shows, that case does illustrate that there are multiple things you need to do when you are fully honoring a retrospective and the action items that come out of that retrospective.
And you're right. And here at PagerDuty, we look at that as an opportunity to learn. So yeah, as we joined forces with Jelly last year and brought Jelly on board into the PagerDuty family, and now are combining it into our full portfolio, we see that feeding back to the product teams and the platform engineering teams and the SREs and the developers, and across the board as well. So yeah, it's not just over when the incident's over. Exactly right. Love your memory analogy as well. I always talk about memory and garbage collection kicks in and transactions get slower, and it's a whole plethora of things go wrong.
Right.
Maybe it should get us onto, it's not quite the place to talk about, but I love your moment. The root cause or contributing factors, isn't it? Is the
and then the product team says, yeah, we're rewriting it all in Rust, and yeah, I'm going to take a little while. Right.
Awesome.
So maybe we'll try and speed up the tempo here. Follow up, and I love Jelly. Great product, great concept. Kudos, to PagerDuty for seeing the potential there. Clearly, Jelly helps you prepare There's a lot of running around. I mean, I've seen that running around done manually. I've been a part of that. And then there's the analysis phase, and then obviously the mitigate phase. I may be sounding like a broken record at this point, but you need to route to the appropriate demand queues, and then action items that are not followed up. I like to see some kind of an escalation. Most shops, even large shops, are not this mature. But action items that come out of a major incident that are not followed up, I believe that that's actually quantifiable risk. In your most mature organizations, you might even roll that up to the enterprise risk register. It's certainly a form of technical debt. Um, I love the flow framework, task top, plan view. And it explicitly says all work is features, defects, deaths, or risks.
Brilliant.
And then it all is on an even footing with the product team. The product team, the business might be saying we need features, but one of the things we always recommend is that at least, between 10 to 30% of the value stream funding should be dedicated to the ongoing repayment of technical debt.
It's always going to be there.
Yeah,
You're building up that bank from day one, so it's just going to get bigger and bigger.
Yep, absolutely. So let's maybe move on.
Yeah, talk us through this, the new support model.
Okay. So now we're getting into some operating model discussions that definitely can go a number of directions. There's a lot of variation in how people are transforming the operating models, but this is one major pattern we're seeing. It used to be you had tier one was the help desk or the network operations center, not the same, but certainly with a strong communication link between them. And by the knock, I don't just mean networking. I mean that's the traditional name for the whole, the whole operations. Um, and then you have application support at tier two. So they're, running run books, they're, creating run books, they're doing some break fix coding, which led to certain problems that ultimately culminated, in my interpretation, in the creation of DevOps and continuous integration. And then you had to go through those two tiers to get to tier three. Now, tier two is really under a lot of pressure. I think that people really didn't, I mean, nobody wanted to be a maintenance programmer. And so we wound up saying, well, we're going to take the higher parts of tier two and put that in the build run product team. And then the lower parts of tier two, we're going to try and get up tier one's game, because we also have tier zero emerging, which is they can shed some load to tier zero. But you still need a help desk. You don't want your developers and engineers, chasing after low-level alerts or answering help desk calls. That's not a good use of their time. And SRE, there's a lot of variation there. You got the Netflix model, you got the Google model, but in general, they are definitely going to help, in incident resolution and or incident retrospective. And they may actually build some of the automation. They may help build some of the automation. Um,
Yes.
and they may or may not take the escalation from tier one. Whether that goes directly to the product team really depends on the shop. But these are some of the higher level dynamics we're seeing. And I'm always interested in hearing your stories. If you ever, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm easy to
Absolutely.
find. I'm a fairly public figure, for better or worse. So ping me on LinkedIn, and tell me what you're doing if you've got strong opinions on this, because I'm always learning.
Yeah, sorry,
Um,
model's great. I see a lot of organizations I work with kind of have them as the Uber enablers. They're the ones that set the
hmm
foundations for everyone, get everyone working together.
Yes.
I work with a large telco, and their SRE teams focused on the one code base. So globally, many teams quite often producing the same code to do the same, well, different code to do the same outcomes. So their SREs are very much bringing everyone together. I can share some immutable telemetry webinars that they did for us another day.
Yeah. That's fascinating. And in some ways, that's what enterprise architecture has tried to do over the years. But EA still has a place at the higher portfolio systems of systems level. But
Yeah,
EA always struggled at the solutions level. and having that code level understanding of things like redundancy and technical debt and sprawl. We're definitely seeing more interaction. In the most mature shops, it's a very positive collaboration between EA and SRE. And maybe SRE really starts to wear some of that former hat that was called solutions architecture. Not that solutions architecture has gone away. We've talked to a lot of people doing it. Um, but that's a different, we're going off on a tangent here,
That's
as I
all.
sometimes do. Yeah, and then add a little bit of a build there. It does depend on the SRE model. There is variation, there is differences of opinion on how to do this. We just kind of report on that. So I want to pivot a little bit here into some of the deeper fundamentals before we close out. One of the things we saw during the July 19th situation, it became obvious to me that, again, what we said at the beginning, that the system is not just the tech, it's not just the databases and the algorithms, the linear algebra optimization algorithms that are trying to figure out the best way forward for your, supply chain or whatever. The system as a whole also includes the ships sailing on the ocean, the airplanes flying in the air or grounded,
Absolutely.
the railroads. The system itself is physical, and you need to understand the interaction of the physical and the digital worlds. And a shock in the digital world clearly has ripple effects in the real world. You might recover your systems, you might recover the processing nodes, you might recover the data nodes. Data can be a bit more difficult to recover, but you might recover all of that just fine, and you still find that your supply chain, your actual operational situation has now taken such a shock that it takes days to recover. And this, I think, is a wake-up call for true operational resilience. It can't be seen as, real world operational resilience is one thing, and then tech resilience is another thing. That's like the old, I think, somewhat problematic distinction between disaster recovery and business continuity.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
It's all continuity, it's all resilience. Bottom line is, I think this is a wake-up call for operational resilience to start looking at things in a more integrated way. And that's absolutely what Forrester said in our recent report, and retrospective on the topic from an analyst firm perspective. But all of this, well, what do we mean by resilience? Next slide, please.
Yeah.
You know,
There it is again.
John just deserves so much respect for what he's done and the conversations he started driving years ago on this whole topic. You will have incidents. They are investments. You will make investments. These are unplanned investments. But you can plan at a higher level that this kind of thing is going to happen. And the challenge is to how do you learn from these? Don't let a good crisis go to waste.
Waste.
You have a learning opportunity. You will emerge stronger. And this statement still is absolutely, absolutely on point. And there's still too many companies, that have, the template-driven approach. They're still not instituting ongoing organizational learning. And so, a couple just key points to set the context here. Next slide. I was in the audience when Dave said this. I think it was at Chaos Conf in San Francisco in 2019 before the pandemic. Complex systems will always surprise you. I use as a metaphor what's called a murmuration of starlings. They do this over the Thames, the big river in England. And they make all of these wonderful shapes. They are a complex system. They operate on very simple bird business rules. Don't fly too close to the other bird. but don't fly too far away from the other bird because you might get eaten by a hawk. And follow the insects, whatever the other rules are. And out of these very simple rules, you see these amazing shapes that can take surprising forms, like a giant bird. So I always use this slide to talk about, well, what do I really mean by emergence? Next slide. And I also said earlier, the law of stretch systems. We baseline a system at a new level of performance, and then we push it to see how far it will take us and whether it will help us beat the competition because we're in a competitive world. This law, as much as anything else, explains why we will never get to that nirvana of, complete automation, no incidents. The world is just not set up that way. And there are multiple observations of this nature. I'm a huge fan of a woman named Lisanne Bainbridge who wrote a paper years ago called Ironies of Automation. And for those of you with a bit more of a academic bent, it's not a horribly academic paper. I always recommend that paper as well as reading the resilience engineering literature. Next slide. One of the very, very simplified, but I still think very compelling problems we have here is the fact that as you increase automation, for example, as you move to faster release cycles, you wind up with the knowledge becoming more ephemeral. So this is one of the problems of automation and even DevOps. I have talked to traditional service managers who say, yeah, we used to write knowledge articles. Nowadays, by the time we've written the knowledge article, the product team has it fixed at the fundamental level and the knowledge article's outdated.
Absolutely.
I don't know. I mean, there's no silver bullet to this, but it's definitely something that, I think thoughtful operators need to be aware of because the faster we iterate and respond to market dynamics, the more we're tempted to layer complexity on, which is why it's so important to segregate and absolutely fanatically defend that ongoing technical debt pay down and refactoring budget. And just to, make it very clear to your business partners, executive sponsors that that budget really is in an important way seed corn. It's deferring maintenance. It's refusing to oil the tractor, and it's not going to end well. So you have to have the organizational resources, capacity, and commitment to continually rectifying in the face of these kinds of dynamics.
It's a great use. It is actually a great use case for Gen AI because we're seeing the scenarios where this works. So this works, but it's a bit fragile. What can we do to improve this? So I was speaking to a game developer the other day, and they were talking about how they're seeing some game development which would have taken 2 years. They're shrinking it down to 2 to 3 months by eliminating some debt and then using Gen AI to fill in some of the spaces. And it's not replacing people; it's actually just hitting time to market faster. So I feel those that embrace some of this technology and use it to do some of these things that you're outlining here, I think they're going to be the winners in this competitive world. So it's exciting times.
Absolutely. At the risk of going off on a little bit of a tangent, but the simplistic image or meta example I would use is, okay, so take two companies with 100 people each. Company number one achieves some benefits with Gen AI and promptly cuts, 40% of the staff.
Ooh.
Company number two achieves equal benefits with Gen AI because they're head-to-head competitors and retrains 40 staff in higher order, more valuable tasks and capabilities. Which company would you invest in?
I mean, that's a no-brainer, isn't it? What a great story.
Right?
That's what we're going to see more of that. I think, it's the agentic world embraces us over the next 5 years. It is exciting times, definitely exciting times. Not interesting times, but exciting.
So next slide, let me close out here and then let's hear a few words about PagerDuty. ticketing, if you're scaling up and you're just starting to think seriously about major incident management, number one thing is we want to let tickets fade into the background. This is different than trying to get rid of them.
Yeah. Still valuable.
Um, they're still valuable, but we want them underneath the floorboards in the plumbing. You can still get at the plumbing if you need to. Um, Chat ops, definitely. I think
Yeah.
this statement is ready for prime time, maybe a little bit long in the tooth here, but still absolutely true. You should be able to interact with your critical systems, your runbooks, etc. Without having to swivel chair over to different interfaces. And then definitely, I'm very up to date on the right here. The smart chatbots, cognitive search, leveraging Gen AI, and old school AI. Machine learning is just as important as Gen AI. And that's well established, but we're getting more and more accelerating value out of machine learning. I suspect that was a machine learning algorithm that pinged you, resulted in you getting pinged on the 19th.
It
Uh,
did all the grouping and pinged me once, which was
yep,
key. So all the
absolutely.
plethora of monitoring that we had, I mentioned one, but there's tons of other tools that we've got in place to give us that perfect customer experience and lens on our platform.
Yep, absolutely. And so with that, I think there's a lot of other implicit recommendations and that I've covered over here in terms of, how to structure your incident response capabilities. But Tim, why don't you tell us a little bit about PagerDuty's capabilities and approach to this?
Well, it fits in beautifully to what we've just discussed. And actually, top on this list, digital operations resiliency. That's what we've been talking about through the last 40 minutes. We're seeing so much across the market now. In fact, in the space of financial services, this is being mandated. So whether it's CPS 230 that rolls off the tongue from Prudential down in APJ, or whether it's the DORA Act, and that's not metrics, the DORA metrics, that's all about the Digital
Yeah.
Operations Resiliency Act in the EU.
Oh, that's sorry to interrupt. That's such a terrible collision for us.
Why did they do that to us? And then, of course,
Sorry.
us Europeans have a habit of coming up with these things that then proliferate around geographically and around different industries as well. So yeah, GDPR being a very good example of, I think that's now California privacy law and various others around the world. So digital operations resiliency is something that came to the fore now for most C-level executives around the world. It's now up there alongside investments in security and investments in AI. So resiliency is in that top 5. We mentioned quite a few things as we went round there that people are investing in. So automation has been around since the first industrial age, but it's not centralized in IT. It's not audited. It's not always run with guardrails, and you can't delegate it to people around your organization. So we're seeing people investing in there. That's service ownership. So as you said, PagerDuty over its 15 years has driven a change in the way that we respond to incidents and been a pivotal part of the kind of the DevOps transformation we've seen across organizations. And of course, throughout this, we've talked about our incident management transformation. And you're right. So you use the TOC, SOC, NOC, the operations center effectively, in whichever letter you want to stick in front of it. It's not going away, but it's definitely transforming. We're seeing that modernization, that transformation as we go through. And where PagerDuty fits in is the operations cloud that addresses all of those problems that we've seen. And as we say, we integrate with over 700 technologies and the number's growing. So the key principle is, back to your point, there's so much noise. How do we correlate? How do we combine that information to actually make sense of it so that when the next thing comes up that's going to wake us up at 5 a.m. occurs, how do we make sense of it rather than being inundated by noise and complexity? If I focus in on what we're talking about here, from customer service ops, you mentioned earlier, Charlie, we still can't get away from it, but human beings still make a really good monitoring tool. They're excellent in the ways that they pick up the quirks in our digital systems and report into us. So customer service is still going to be key, whether that's agents of humans or agentic driving that. We still need to have that interface to the engine of the organization. What's our digital front end doing? So we need to give customer service that viewpoint. AI ops definitely that's a whole new webinar you and I could have about talking about what is the meaning of AI ops. But to us, it's about reducing the noise, focusing your attention on events that count, ignoring things that don't count. You talked about enriching data and the CMDB or the service directory or the catalog, however organizations want to refer to it today. How do we enrich that information and route it to the right individuals, the right teams? How do we trigger off into the right automation that can then deal with things? So with PagerDuty's automation, how do we get diagnostics without disturbing people? How do we run remediations? How do we delegate those fixes? And last but not least, we talked about driving the mean time to acknowledge or mobilize individuals all the way through to the mean time to repair. We drive that through incident management. Mm-hmm. That's all about mobilizing the right individuals, mobilizing, in the case of July 19th, the right teams, taking them through a well-orchestrated, and you talked all about chat ops earlier. So with PagerDuty combined with Jelly, we're orchestrating teams in chat ops or any plane that they effectively need to work within to drive to an outcome, and then creating that opportunity to learn at the end of it and running all those crucial workflows that you need to execute along the way. As I say, predefined workflows with an expected outcome, which could be updating our stakeholders, updating status pages so that we inform our customers as well. I can't get out of all of this without pointing out PagerDuty's Advance. That is our Gen AI capability that can help augment our engineers, augment our SREs, augment our frontline individuals to make sure that we deal with time-sensitive, time-critical issues as and when they arrive, so we can go back to the day jobs. Productivity, that's what it should be about, not firefighting all the time. So on that note, I want to say thank you for everyone for attending. Thank you, Charlie, for your time today. As I say, it's always great when two avid guitarists get onto a call and then also start to talk about resiliency and incident management and AI and all the things that we've talked about over the last close to an hour. So thank you very much for your time. Great to see you again, Charlie.
Yeah, likewise. I had a great time.